I use Claude mostly.
I thought you might say
Yes,
Claude,
I'm
actually.
a Claude
Yeah.
girly. Primarily because the outputs are a lot more robust and less pandering than ChatGPT.
Right.
So I do enjoy that, but I actually use a combination of the two of them. So ChatGPT may be for everyday things, but when it comes to work, I'm all in Claude.
Hey there, inSTEM fam. Welcome back to another episode of inSTEM Podcast. I'm your host, Tolu, and as always, I'm excited to bring you another conversation that is packed with value, tips for personal and professional growth, and real actionable insights from the people that actually do the work. Today's guest is an absolute superstar. She has experienced a rapid rise through the senior corporate ranks. I love to call her the queen of startups because she's had such an amazing experience working for some of the most exciting companies in the clinical tech space, including startups, obviously, as well as global organizations. Please join me welcome the amazing Chibby Ebegaye. Welcome to inSTEM, Chibby.
Thank you very, very much for that warm welcome. Thank you very much.
You are a superstar, and I can't wait to delve into your career journey. So in this episode, we're going to be talking all things startup culture, bold pivots, and what the future of the clinical tech space looks like. So get ready to be inspired, and more importantly, get ready to act. Let's get into it. Firstly, you look lovely.
Thank you
always
very much.
looking fashionable and stylish every time I see you. And I love a fashionable STEM girly as well, because I think there's a stereotype that, we're, very drab and dull in our dressing, but I love it when, we get the fashion inspiration. So the tradition here is we start with icebreakers.
Okay.
And given that you are a true tech girly, I was thinking to ask you something along the lines of tech. Okay. So my question is, I'd like to ask, what are your favorite GenAI tools, the ones that you use every day?
Okay, so I use Claude mostly.
I thought you might say Claude, actually.
I'm a Claude girly. Primarily because, and maybe we'll get into some of it when we talk about work, but I think the outputs are a lot more robust and less pandering than ChatGPT.
Right.
So I do enjoy that, but I actually use a combination of the two of them. So ChatGPT may be for everyday things, but when it comes to work, I'm all in Claude.
Yeah. I'm definitely an advocate of Claude.
Yes.
I do love Gemini as well. I use Gemini like literally every day.
Yeah.
And Perplexity is another one I'm really enjoying.
Yeah, I have heard a lot about it, but I haven't used it yet.
I've been using it more recently, and it's pretty good as well. Excellent. So my first question is around I think you have one of the most fascinating, career trajectories I've ever come across. A truly unconventional STEM career. Started off as a teacher in Thailand and as well as a clinical trial assistant, and now you've risen to the ranks of, senior director at a leading, clinical tech startup. And I'd really love to know two things to start with. One is, what's the common thread that's connected all of those different roles across the last 10 to 12 years of your career? And also, what's guided your decision each step of the way?
Okay, so I think that trajectory of teaching straight out of uni in Thailand to where I am now is also like a big thing of me being like, I'll try anything once. So I will try anything based on what I think I'm going to kind of get from the experience.
Right.
So that early experience was, I'm coming out of university. I don't know what I want to do yet. I know that I don't want to work in labs. I don't know if I want to do another course. How can I leverage what I've learned or do something that's kind of interesting but gives me travel experience? I like to travel as well. So that's kind of where that started. And then I think as I've gone through my career, it's always making decisions around, how do I stretch myself? How do I challenge myself? But also, how do I stay true to the things I think are a little bit more about my character? So I am a solution-oriented person. I like to solve problems. Right. I like to solve what we call complex challenges in the world of like management consulting, for example. So I think throughout my career, I've always made decisions based on, one, I will try anything. And two, am I going to be stretched? Am I going to be challenged? I'm not going to be bored. And then number three, does this still like lean into that kind of problem solving mindset that I believe that I have? So I think that's how I've navigated like that that stretch of things that seem a little bit random, but they actually, in my mind, there's a common thread throughout all of the things that I've done. And also, sometimes I've had moments where I've had to think, okay, if this next change, what are the things I need out of this next change? So sometimes it's more about, it's a lateral change, but I want to get broader or more in-depth experience. Sometimes it's a change because I want broader experience, and I'm too deep in the weeds of something, and I want to have more breadth. So that's kind of how I look at those career.
That's amazing. And it's such an amazing set of frameworks as well. You know, the wanting to stretch yourself. I'm not surprised, like your CV screams go-getter, you know, very like, you know, highly ambitious, but also I love the consistency with your values and the things that you like. So wanting to do something solution orientated.
Yes.
It's clear that you like to do things that you actually enjoy,
Yes.
that you have a flair for. And I just think it's amazing to have those guiding principles along the way. I think it's really important. So you studied biochemistry at university, started off in the scientific technical space, but then shifted. When I was looking at your career on LinkedIn, you shifted into more business and strategic roles. And I was wondering, was that shift intentional, or was it something that you just found yourself naturally evolving into? And the second part of the question is, moving from a scientific role into commercial roles, were there any certifications, qualifications, special mentorship that you were able to, that you did to make the transition confidently?
Yeah. So I would say that at the beginning, it probably wasn't like 100% intentional. So I knew that I never wanted to work in labs. I just knew that was not for me.
Right.
And having that experience as a clinical trial assistant intern at a large pharma company, I was like, oh, I like this environment. So I knew that I liked being in that environment where it kind of is like business meets the science. Yeah. So my first year in a global pharma company, I kind of got exposure to working with lots of vendors based on the role that I had, which is about clinical trial outsourcing. So I got exposure to a lot of vendors, and exposure to a lot of like outsourcing kind of capabilities. And I remember thinking, like, I like what I see them doing. Like, I like seeing that these people are solving problems, solving challenges that we're giving them. And that made me quite fascinated around that type of work. I didn't know what it would look like, but I knew that that's something I wanted to do. So in kind of leaving that environment and then going into my first startup, which was, you know, the very first startup I worked with for a company called Drug Dev, I was very much new to that entire space, new to how that would work, new to what it was like to be in service of other companies, selling technology, selling services. But as I got into it and I leaned into it, I realized that I absolutely loved it. And I realized that it triggers something in my brain that releases a lot of positive chemicals around, there's this problem, I've been asked to solve it, or there's this service, I've been asked to deliver the service, and I want to please my client, please my customer. So I didn't do any courses, but I had really strong mentorship. So I had really, really strong like managers, leaders, and some of this is actually being in the startup environment for the first time. So in a startup, it's literally a baptism by fire in the things that you'll be learning. So there are a lot of things you're asked to do that you might not be able to ask to do if you're in a huge company where you have a very distinct role.
Right,
so
of course,
so leaning in where there's like maybe less resource, or being stretched to do something, stretched to go to a meeting, stretched to follow your manager to a particular client event or client meeting. That was kind of how I was rapidly learning and rapidly picking up the skills. And then I'm quite proactive about wanting coaching or wanting mentorship. So as well as doing those things, but like actually asking, you know, what can I do to close the gap? What skills do you think I need? How can I lean into those? Who should I be working with across the company in different teams to kind of get that experience? Going to conferences, going to conventions and those types of events also helped to kind of be sitting in and hearing people talk and learning that way.
I think it's an amazing answer, because typically we think that maybe we need to do something, you know, grand, like an MBA, like, you know, spend tens of thousands of dollars to acquire, to bridge that gap from technical to business. And if it's for you, obviously do that. But it's quite refreshing to hear of some of the more down-to-earth examples, mentorship, coaching, going to events, observing, shadowing. I think it's so important. And it's things that people can literally take and run with you know, as they watch this episode. So that's quite refreshing to hear. The other thing I wanted to ask in and around, you know, your experience is, whether scientific, technical, or commercial, one thing has remained consistent across the last 10 to 12 years of your career, and it's that you've worked in the clinical tech space, life sciences. What is the appeal of clinical tech that has kept you there, all this while, even though you've worked across several organizations? Like, what's the appeal? And for those who might be considering a career in this space, what can they look forward to, especially in 2026 as well?
Yeah. So clinical research is something that we know takes a really, really long amount of time to ever get from like an initial discovery, or once you've done discovery and you're doing clinical research, through to getting drugs to market and into the hands of patients. Yeah. It takes a really, really long amount of time. I think I'm quite inspired by that. I'm quite inspired by the fact that it takes that long. And a lot of what takes long is around business process, infrastructure, as well as, obviously, yes, it costs a lot to run a big trial or run any trial, but it costs a lot when you get into the phase 3s. And there's a lot of steps involved in terms of getting regulatory approval. But also, I think one of the other things that I think is interesting about this space is it's also highly regulated. So getting anything done is quite an achievement. So for me, that space, there's a wealth of opportunity in terms of clinical technology, data analytics, and AI now to really accelerate clinical development and really accelerate the time it takes to get drugs or medicines researched, developed, and into the hands of patients, the patients who need them the most. So that is the kind of like end goal, but also working in a space where there is, so much opportunity, so much that can still be redefined, so to speak, especially with this kind of acceleration of modernization of technologies we're seeing, this tech revolution around AI. There is a wealth of opportunity. So I think I never really run out of ideas in that space, because it's a huge important part of the pharma value chain. It's a very, very expensive part of the pharma value chain. It's a very difficult area to solve for in terms of speed, cost, quality, and so there's always kind of like new solutions that you can bring in that space, and that's probably what drives me to kind of stay there.
Yeah, I can definitely see from the answers, and such an exciting space it sounds like, and also very impactful, because what's been done by solving these problems of speed, cost, efficiency is really impacting day to day, like everyone in society.
Exactly.
So it's amazing. It must be really cool to have a career or a role where you actually enjoy what you're doing, but also you're making such tangible impacts to society as well.
Yes, I mean, I always say we're very several steps or people away from the patient, but I know that the work we're doing is impacting the people who are running the trials, and that impacts the people who are running, or doctors and nurses who are seeing patients in the hospital, and all of that is kind of like connected. And for me, that's the joy of it.
Yeah. And each piece is
important.
Whether or not you're early on in the process or closer to the patient. So that's really interesting. I mentioned earlier that you've worked across several organizations. When I was doing this podcast research, I was like, wow, like I think I counted like nearly 8 or 9 companies, and I was like, how has she done it in a 10-year span? So it led me to wanting to know, I believe joining a new organization is like a marathon. There's a lot to take in, there's a lot to learn. No matter the number of years of experience you have, there is still a process, right?
Yeah.
And that kind of, learning curve that you have to go through. But what I can deduce from your career is clearly you've mastered the art of fast starts, having gone through several organizations. So I'd like to know, for those, especially those who are looking to start a new job, a new role, move into new organizations, what are some strategies and processes that you employ to build trust quickly and make impact quickly?
Okay. One thing I will clarify, so the joy of working with a startup is that you join other companies by acquisition. So some of those the jobs that looks like I've worked at 2 different places, like I'm with the same organization, but we got acquired.
Thanks for clarifying that, but that's interesting to know as well.
So there is this book that I've read in the latter part of my career, probably in the last 2 jobs I've used, last 2 to 3 jobs, and it's called The First 90 Days. And I do need to find the author, or maybe you can, and then kind of add it. But that is a really, really good resource when you're starting a new job. It kind of takes you through, especially when you're coming in as a leader. It takes you through the types of things you need to do, or attitude, actually, I think, and behavior you need to have when you're coming into a new organization. So I think at any level, something that we typically like to do is like come in and from day one, we're like having impact, showing value from the very beginning. But actually, one of the things that I do when I start a new job is I actually take a lot of time to observe. So I like to understand not only like what is it I'm supposed to be doing and the business process and tactical things like the SAPs. I also want to understand like who are the people that are going to be most impacted by the outputs of my job? Right. Who are the people going to be most maybe positively impacted or affected? What is the organizational culture, for example? Who are the influencers of decisions? Who are the decision makers? Taking time to kind of like step back and look at all of those things in the first like month or so is a really good way of me understanding, right now I understand not just how to do my job, but how I can do my job in such a way that it delivers value to all of these people and that I can start making a difference early. Another thing, especially when you get later in your career and you're kind of in a leadership role, and I think people tend to do is like want to make changes immediately. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to show you an entirely new way of doing things. That's also a big error because a lot of people are kind of like, well, we were already here. What was wrong with what we were doing already? So being able to understand how to get people on board and supporting like new ideas, new ways of doing things. I've done this at a different company. It kind of worked. How would that work here? What would it look like here? And having those types of discussions is another way of being able to come in, observe, and then start fast. So I think I do start fast, but there's an amount of time of observation at the beginning.
I love that. My key takeaway is observation. I think each company, organization, context, you even mentioned that some of those companies were acquisitions, but ultimately the context is changing, right? Because they're part of a bigger, structure. Have unique attributes about them. So taking time to actually understand that and then synergizing that with your value is so important. So your value isn't misplaced. Like, exactly. It's not just about being good. It's actually knowing how to, communicate your value, demonstrate it, apply it, implement it in a way that is useful for all of the parties involved. So that's really interesting, and definitely we'll be linking the book and the description of the video. You reached director, managing director levels, pretty early on in your career, like in your early 30s. And I'd like to know whether you've ever, had any experiences of imposter syndrome. It feels like obviously everyone has, right? But, how specifically as it relates to you being a young person in, boardrooms where there are probably like way more experienced people, and how you've also been able to ensure that your voice is heard, how you command respect as a young person.
So, yes, to imposter syndrome, at least at the, less so now actually, but at least at the, when I was first getting those types of roles. And the way in which I think, so I feel I also look young. I look younger than I am. Being a young Black woman in some of these spaces, it was very difficult. I'll be completely honest. It was very difficult at the beginning in terms of like making the title match what people were seeing on in meetings or on the screen. And so a lot of that was leaning into, I think that part of my career, I was really leaning into my sponsors. So I really leaned into knowing that there are people who are going to like speak about me in rooms I'm not there, or go before me, or almost give a blurb about me before I enter the room, or before I collaborate with some of these people. So I leaned very heavily into that, and then I also overly leaned into like perfection. So wanting to show up to every single meeting completely polished, rehearse my whole talk track down to a T. Like literally typing it out and rehearsing it. Like I would go over the top because I wanted people to know that like I can show up, as a senior leader. And then when I shifted into management consulting, that was kind of pushed me to have to be able to like do that on the fly. And so all of the kind of pressure I would put on myself to kind of be perfect, you can't really do that in a job where you're constantly talking to senior leaders. Where's the time? There's no time. You're told you need to go into a meeting like with very short notice. And so I think with that, I just started to realize like, actually that went well. Like the more times that I would do it and show up well and have influence, have an impact, deliver value, the more times I was doing that, the more I was realizing like, actually I'm in the place I'm supposed to be, and I am somebody that people are taking direction from, somebody that people are leaning into for advice, somebody that people kind of come to have a decision made, and realizing like I was already doing that allowed me to kind of like relax in that feeling of like, oh, have I got here too soon, or am I the right person for the role? And it allowed me to kind of like lean into that. And then also, I will never believe I've arrived. So I have, whether that's like a insecurity of mine or something like that, but I'm somebody that never really feels like I've arrived. I always feel like there's more for me to learn and more for me to gain. And so I think that also helps me to keep wanting to like improve my skills and sharpen my skills. So yes, there's less of the imposter syndrome, but I still feel like there's more for me to be able to learn and more for me to be able to upskill in my professional career.
That's amazing. And I definitely feel like that sense of I've not arrived is, I don't actually see it as an insecurity. I think it's quite well informed, and I think it's really important to keep us leveled, right? The mentality, and to help us push, for more, right? Because there's always more. So it's really interesting to see how you've navigated it and where you are now. And a lot of leaders that sometimes we get in awe of, they're also figuring things out on their own. And can you speak a little bit to that? Have you seen some experiences of that where you're like, actually, like, I don't need to be perfect because actually the people in front of me, around the table with me, aren't perfect themselves? Have you caught any moments like that?
Yeah, I have caught moments of that. And it wasn't necessarily that they weren't perfect. It was more that they're several levels above me, but they are interested in what I have to say. And wanting to, like, having discussions with people who are more senior to you where, like, your opinion actually holds a lot of weight. And I realized that was like a clicking moment for me of thinking, actually, like, they've got here for various different reasons, but they want people in their teams who are maybe, who can do things they can't do, or who can bring a perspective they can't bring. And I always say to people who are kind of like intimidated by their leaders or thinking I have to kind of have all these things checked off or be able to do all of these things, that being able to see yourself as somebody who can still like influence a decision or influence a discussion point, or be able to have conversations with those people where they're thinking, wait, I never thought of that, or wait, that's a really, really good idea. Why don't you help me in building that out? Why don't you help me to make that a reality? I've noticed that is something that, for me at least, allowed me to kind of see myself as somebody who was on the path to where they are at, because they value my perspective and what they're doing, and helping them to kind of show up as the leader that they need to be. And I think that was it. It wasn't necessarily that I realized like, oh, they're still figuring it out, because they are, but it's like they're figuring it out and they want to figure it out with you. And that really, really helped.
I know that's such an important recognition to make, that your voice counts, your opinion matters, and they're actually genuinely interested. I know there are some people that may disagree depending on personalities, but generally they do want your perspective. They need it. There's such a thing as diversity of thought, right? That helps them do their job better and make more sound decisions. That's excellent.
I think one of the things that one of the things I often encourage people to do is to have an understanding of what it is that they know that they're good at, what they would like to develop out as skills, what they're maybe not so good at and don't want to do, and what they know that they should probably improve upon to have the career that they want to have, and kind of almost draw that out in a matrix, and understand for themselves, okay, I know that this is what I love. This is what I love to do. I know that I would love to be able to do this. I don't have those skills yet. I know I don't like to do this, and I actually don't want a career that has any of that at all. And then I also have like areas I'm kind of like, I don't want to do it so much, but I know it's important to grow. I think that's a really good starting point. Often when I mentor people, I kind of start with that, because sometimes an unconventional career, you don't know everything. I can't tell you, like, some people can tell you what they're going to do in 5-10 years. I'm one of those people that's like, I don't know, because I kind of go with like, not go with the wind, but I kind of go with what I said at the beginning, like, does it challenge me? Does it, like, is it going to still be solution oriented? So I don't know what exactly those job titles are going to be, what companies they're going to be, but I know that this is what I want to be doing, and I always have an idea of what I want my brand to be, or what I want to be known for, versus the exact job or the job title. And I think that's one of the key things about people who have unconventional careers. It's not carved out down to the title or to the specific company. It's more around the brand you want to have and the things you want to be kind of maintaining in your career story. So that's one of the things. It should take you where you need to go, and you will reevaluate it every couple of years. You will look back at that matrix and think, are these still the things that I love? Absolutely. Are these still the things that I need to prove upon? Have I actually got these skills now? Do I need to change them? But that's kind of something that I still use to this day in thinking about how I move through my career.
Amazing advice, by the way. What resonates particularly with me is the going back to check, because also as you're growing in your career, you're gathering more data points.
Exactly.
You're validating, do I actually really enjoy doing this? So, the flexibility to go back and, change the plan a little bit is needed as well, right? But it's been so brilliant having you. I think we need to bring you back actually, to delve into some of the aspects that we've not been able to cover today, but it's been great. Thank you
I've enjoyed the conversation too. Thank you very much for having me.
Inspirational advice that you've shared, and thank you for sticking by. All of you who've been watching, make sure you share your key takeaways in the comments and also click on the like and subscribe buttons. Until the next conversation, bye.